Welcome to the Mark and Mitch show. We have talked about many things, festivals, Van Halen, Kiss making a new album, but this time we're going to go back into yesteryear and just talk about our very first shows that we ever went to and what it meant to us. So, Mark, I'll start with you. What was the first show that sort of set you on the path to what we do today?
Well, the first rock show I went to, I was exposed to. I went to Chuck Mangione with my parents, which is more jazzy rock. But I saw him twice when I was a real little kid. But the first rock show I went to was Mötley Crüe. It was actually kind of a triple bill, if you will. Heavy Penton, followed by Saxon, followed by Mötley Crüe,
Wait,
and that was
Saxon with Mötley Crüe?
yeah, that was the Shout at
Wow.
the Devil tour. That was the
Wow.
Shout at the Devil tour, and it was after Mötley Crüe had been out with Ozzy on Bark at the Moon. So that was really my first big show. I remember my mom took us to that show with two of our friends, and it was at kind of a. It wasn't an arena. It was the Aragon Ballroom Theater in kind of in the heart of Chicago, and it was an overwhelming experience and something I was real proud of. Of course, I bought the T-shirt, wore it the next day. Bought two T-shirts. I have both of them still to this day.
Yeah,
The
when
Saxon,
T-shirts were $8 a pop, not
right?
60 like now.
The Crusader T-shirt by Saxon, and the Shout at the Devil 83-84 tour by Mötley Crüe T-shirt. And of course, this was in 1984. And fond memories of that show. Just really was a great way to kick off my live concerts.
Was
As
there
far as
any
rock stuff goes.
preparation for it? Like, because you must have known for months that it was coming up. Did you sort of play the albums at nauseum until the show day, or
Oh
did
yeah.
you? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Mötley Crüe. I'd been exposed to them. I'd bought the Looks That Kill single was the first thing I ever bought by them, and that, of course, on the flip side, had off the first record had Piece of Your Action, and
Yeah.
then shortly after that, I bought the Shout at the Devil record, and then a good month or so before the concert, I bought the Too Fast for Love album. So I was fully prepared. I had both their records going into the show. And I will say my one memory of that show, well, lots of memories of that show, but one big memory is that Saxon really gave Mötley Crüe a run for their money, and the crowd was fully engaged with Saxon. And just like I saw Saxon recently, it was a similar, well, it wasn't quite as bad, but with UFO, when UFO came out, a lot of the energy from the crowd was spent. Saxon is not a great band to follow. They in no way blew Mötley Crüe off the stage or anything like that, but they definitely gave Motley a run for their money on that show. And I was absolutely there to see Motley. I did have the one Saxon Crusader record going into that concert. I had bought it a week or two beforehand. So great memories.
No,
And yeah, that's what started it off for me.
here,
How about you?
let me. Well, before I get to me, let me ask you two questions. First of all,
Yeah.
I've always said that Shout at the Devil is Mötley Crüe's best album, just bar none. Are you in the same thought process, or do you go Dr. Feelgood or the first one? Where do you lie with that?
Oh, absolutely. Shout at the Devil is their best record. And the first album, Too Fast for Love, is definitely close for me. And I like Dr. Feelgood, but to me, those two records are just Mötley Crüe at their best. The first album, to me, leaned a little more pop punkish, if you will. It still had that hard rock vibe. The Shout at the Devil record, to me, and I know the word metal or heavy metal has become so,
Blasé. It's like we don't even know what it
blasé
means
today. No
anymore.
one even knows what it is. But at that time, Shout at the Devil was a heavy metal record, much more so than the first one, which leaned a little more punk. I mean, Motley knew what was going on. There was, coming off the new wave of British heavy metal bands kind of exploding. Everyone was kind of going in that direction. And to me, that Shout at the Devil record was possibly the only Motley Crüe record, which I would kind of consider true metal, if you will. And
Yeah.
I know I'm going to probably get shot down for saying that, but at
Yeah.
that time, guys, it had a hard, heavy metal vibe to it.
And it had the
So
imagery associated
yeah,
with it too.
absolutely.
And I gotta say, maybe it's because of the time for me, but I was doing a lot of tennis competitions at the time. I was, in all
Right.
kinds of tournaments, and I would use that cassette tape in the car drive down to get me pumped up. And I always
Right.
figured that when I listened to the Motley, I would win. And if I put in anything else, I just wouldn't get that. Ugh. So
Right.
Motley was my, I don't know, de facto Lucky Charm tennis winning cassette. I,
Nice.
I know that sounds sort of still silly, but
No, I
yeah,
mean, get you pumped up for sure.
it got you
And,
pumped up, and it's, more
at
than
that show, one thing I do remember is they played every song off of Shout at Devil except Danger. That was the only song off the record at least the way I remember it. The only song off the record they didn't play was Danger.
what's with Kiss and Motley Crue not playing their songs called Danger? Both,
Right.
both great songs.
Yeah.
Now, I go back a little further with my first show. So I'm just gonna quickly mention my second show ever was August 11th, 1980. It was Canadian band Tease opening up for Cheap Trick, which was fantastic. But before
Wow.
that, I got started on August 6th, 1979.
Good
That's
for you.
we're heading back in time here,
Yeah.
and it was New England opening up for Kiss, and it was Kiss on the Dynasty tour, and of course, New England was this band that Paul Stanley was involved with. He had produced. Gary Shea, of course, went on with Alcatraz and all kinds of other stuff. The bass player of New England, but what an experience seeing Kiss. I mean, what a first show. You look back at YouTube videos of Deep Purple or of some of these other bands, and it's very nondescript. It's guys in jeans playing their instruments. And I think had I seen that as my first show, I would have been like, oh, all right, that's what a show is. But hearing, when Kiss hit the stage, it went to blackout, and there was just this rattling sound. They had put in this sound effect that the whole sort of building would rattle, and then they rose up from under the stage. They didn't just sort of saunter out there. And then they just stood there for a second, in their pose,
Right.
and the lights hit and the smoke came. Unbelievable. I
I
mean,
loved those costumes, the Dynasty costumes. I
yeah,
had the poster in my wall when they released that image, and it was like the four of them in four different boxes with that. Those costumes were the best. I loved those Dynasty
yeah,
costumes.
it just a great. I mean, especially for a kid. I mean, at the time I was what, 11, 10, 11. So yeah, the ace and the blue and Peters with the green, and
Yeah,
it just was larger than life. And so I'll never forget that. And just everything, the
yeah,
smell, the sound. And I hadn't been to shows. I mean, back in the day when you'd go to the show, people would warm up the crowd by throwing toilet paper rolls and throwing frisbees. So the whole sort of Montreal Forum where it was lit up with people just doing crazy stuff. So there was an entire vibe. And of course, Kiss comes on. They do King of the Nighttime World, Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Move On, and it's just boom, boom, boom.
right.
Does it get better
And,
than that?
and were they playing a lot of songs off of Dynasty? Do you remember the set list? Were they heavy on the Dynasty songs?
Well,
Which
listen,
is a great record. I love Dynasty.
I'll be honest. I've cheated and I've actually pulled up the set list from a website here. So yeah, they had "I Was Made for Loving You," "2000 Man." Um, that's actually all I see. But what I found interesting, of course, was the fact that they were doing solo album songs.
All
You
right.
know,
Okay. Yep.
Paul was doing "Move On," Ace does "New York Groove," and I remember distinctly Gene doing "Radioactive," but maybe over the years of seeing YouTube videos, my memories got foggy, but they were doing solo album songs.
Yeah.
And, what does that
I've
look like?
seen videos of those, like bootleg videos of them doing the solo album songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that time in Kiss is you saw them in the '70s, which I never got to see them in the
Yeah.
'70s. I didn't get to see them until the even though I was a fan as a little kid in the '70s. My parents would never let me go to concerts on weeknights, so I only got when I was in high school. So I only got to see Friday and Saturday concerts through my high school days, and I didn't get a chance to see Kiss until the second half of the '80s. even though they were
Wow.
one. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that because they were one of my favorite
But
bands of all time.
actually, I need to correct myself. I said that Cheap Trick was my second show. Actually, come to think of it, I saw Kiss on July 25th, 1980 at the Palladium in New York with Eric Carr for the first
Wow.
time. So,
Yes. Wow.
so my
Now, is
first,
that the show where only three that Ace didn't play, or no?
no, 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 no. Ace was
Okay.
there.
Ace was
It
there because
was
there's
the
one show, right? Ace didn't
well,
play. They did as a three piece or something.
well, that was for the recording of the video I, where Ace
Oh,
didn't show
okay.
up for
Okay,
the
that was the
recording. That
L.
was in Studio 54 or something. But so actually, when I come to think of it, my first show was Kiss Montreal, August 1979. My second show was Kiss in New York at the Palladium, July 25th, 1980. And then my third show was August 11th with Cheap Trick and Tease at the Montreal Forum. So yeah, I got off to a rousing start. I mean, and to see that Eric Carr show, you know,
That's amazing.
we drove down to New York sort of on a prayer, and I remember distinctly thinking, I've got to see the new guy for the first time. I had just interviewed Gene Simmons in June at the ripe old age of 11, and you can find that video on YouTube in June of 1980. So it made sense that and we went and bought scalper tickets for $35, and I remember my mom being completely pissed that she had to spend that much money on tickets because
Yeah. At
in
that
19
time, that was yeah.
Hey, in that time, $35 is like paying $350 now. I mean, tickets were $8.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so we paid the 35, so $70 for two tickets, and great night. Just a great,
Wow. Now,
just
the thing about the Kiss in the '70s is you got to experience all those great '70 era songs. Now, when they
correct.
moved into the '80s, like, and I started seeing them live in the second half of the '80s, actually. When you look at like the Animalized tour and the Crazy Nights tour, I remember seeing them on Crazy Nights in Providence, Rhode Island, and there was very first of all, obviously no makeup. And I remember Gene came out at that tour, the Crazy Nights tour, and he had a bass that had the Gene Simmons makeup imagery on the
That's right.
bass.
That crazy night bass.
Yeah, and I have pictures that I snapped at that concert. Maybe I'll scan them in and have some of them pop up here. But
Yeah.
anyways, they really weren't embracing the '70s. I always felt like they were kind of in the second half of the '80s. Kiss was almost embarrassed by the '70s. You know, they didn't want the platform boots. They didn't want the Kiss makeup. They went and re-released the Creatures of the Night record with no makeup on the cover. Remember, they put Bruce
yeah,
Kulick on the cover, and
yeah, that 1985 re-release. That was bizarre. By the way, I saw that Creatures of the Night tour with Vinny, and
wow,
yeah, that was strange because Vinny went into this long-winded guitar solo that must have been 10 or 12 minutes, and I just remember thinking, who is this dude? Like, what
yeah,
what is he doing? And yeah, and then I saw, of course, Kiss on the Lick It Up tour with Accept opening up, first time without makeup, and that was very surreal because we didn't have access to MTV, and we didn't. I remember walking by the record store, and there was this non-makeup Lick It Up, and I'm going, they took off the
yeah,
makeup? Oh, because
right,
we didn't have MTV. We didn't see the
yeah,
unveiling up here. So I bought the album and then I went to the show not knowing if they would show up in makeup or not because,
wow,
listen, we didn't have the internet.
pre-internet, yeah,
Pre-internet.
yeah,
You didn't know. Now you dial up and you know the set list and you know exactly when to show up and exactly when to go home. You go, oh, okay, Rock and Roll All Night's the last song. Great. Let's get the car started.
yeah. Yeah. Well, the point I wanted to make though
Yeah.
about Kiss in the second half of the '80s is I felt like they were embarrassed by the '70s era, and they
Yeah.
were trying so hard to fit in with that glam metal commercial hard
Yeah.
rock sound that was going on. And you look at the Crazy Nights tour, which I guess was what, like 87, 88. But there was the set list had Love Gun, it had Cold Gin, it had Rock and Roll All Night, Detroit Rock City, but not a lot of songs from the '70s. I
No.
mean, they were heavy on the '80s era stuff, and that's how it was on Animalized too. I mean, they had Bang Bang You, Fits Like a Glove, Crazy Nights. This is the Crazy Nights tour average set list. No, no, no. I mean, how random is that song? Heaven's on Fire, War Machine, Reason to Live.
Reason to Live, by the
Love
way,
It
I'd love to
Loud,
hear
which
it
was
come back.
still, that would be a good one. I Love It Loud, which was still, '80s era Kiss. Lick It Up, Tears Are Falling. I mean, this is a set list that was almost shunning '70s era Kiss, and I always believed that it wasn't until that like Stanley solo tour in '89 that something clicked in them, and suddenly they were like, "Hey, that stuff we did in the '70s, that was pretty cool." And they started bringing back a lot of those songs, like "Come On and Love Me" ended up back in the set
That
list
might
at
have
that
been
point.
Bob Kulick and Eric Singer on that solo tour that said, "Hey, how about we polish off some of these old songs or
Right.
something?" Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like something right around 1989 clicked with Kiss, and they suddenly realized that stuff we've been so embarrassed about and been trying to distance ourselves from, that stuff was actually cool. And I mean, I think
And they made it
they
very cool on the Revenge tour. When they got back to
yes,
that Revenge tour, and you start seeing, Parasite being done with double drum, double bass drum, you're like,
right,
whoa, way to
yeah,
go,
yeah.
great stuff. But
But yeah, you're a lucky guy. You got to see him through all eras, really. I mean, obviously, you didn't see him in the early '70s, but
nope.
it's awesome
But
that you got to see him in the
but
'70s.
I didn't really get to see them in the '80s. The Lick It Up tour was the last tour that Montreal got until Hot in the Shade. So I didn't
Wow.
see Asylum, I didn't see Crazy Nights, I didn't see
Wow.
Animalize. They just sort of vanished from our radar. And of course, we know now that it's promoters that decide. I mean, if the promoters had put the money on the table, they would have been here. But
Right.
eh, I missed it. Too bad. But
Right.
Kiss was competing. Kiss was competing with Home Sweet Home. They were competing with Pyromania. They were compete. That's why they were. I guess they were trying to focus on, hey, we're here, we're now, we're fresh, we're happening. But you ain't gonna put No 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 up next to King of the Nighttime World. It's just you're not. It's not gonna happen.
Real quick before we go, Mitch, you mentioned the two Kiss shows as your first two concerts, followed by Cheap Trick, I think,
Yep,
if I'm
correct.
correct. What about fourth and fifth? Do you remember those?
After Cheap Trick, so that's August of 1980. Yes, March of '81, I saw Max Webster with Rush, and that show, which was in 1981, ended up being released as Exit Stage Left. So,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, so
Great.
think about it. My first concerts are I get to see Eric Carr debut with Kiss. Cheap Trick, the Montreal show, they had just finished working with John Lennon. They literally flew from New York to Montreal to do the show.
It's
I believe
awesome.
it was Double Fantasy. And then I see Rush, and the show ends up being one of their greatest live albums ever. So, yeah, I had a very sort of momentous
Good run.
debut, good
Yeah,
run.
good run.
And
Yeah,
then
my
after,
second show, I'll leave you with this, was actually Rush. I saw them at the Rosemont Horizon
wow,
in Chicago, outside of Chicago, and Gary Moore opened up. He was just incredible opener on that tour, and fond memories of that show, Rush at
yeah.
the Rosemont Horizon. Grace
You
Under
asked what my
Pressure
fifth
tour.
one
Yeah,
was. The fifth
yeah.
show would have to have been the Creatures of the Night. As far as
Okay.
oh no, you know what? I saw April Wine at the Montreal Forum with was it Johnny Winter or Edgar Winter? Who Johnny Winter.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Not
and then
sure
of course
actually.
the Creatures of the Night. But hey, April Wine at the Montreal Forum. I mean, what
Yeah,
a
I love
time.
April Wine. I love that one record. I was such a big fan of the Nature of the Beast
Yeah,
record. Wore
great
that
Canadian
out.
band.
My
And just
favorite.
quickly, since you mentioned Reason to Live, and we're talking Canadian bands on iTunes and iTunes only, Honeymoon Suite, the great Honeymoon Suite of New Girl Now, cover Kiss's Reason to Live, and you can only find that on iTunes. So if you're interested, folks, go check out Honeymoon Suite doing Reason to Live. I think it's well done, quite frankly.
Good tip, Mitch. And on that note, we will wrap up this episode of the Mark and Mitch Show. Check out Mitch. He is on Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Of course, you
Yes,
can find that on iTunes and
all
most
kinds
of
of
your
wonderful, most
yeah
everywhere, and
yeah most of
at Mitch Lafon on Twitter. But let's also remind folks in the comments here. Tell us about your first show. What was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love reading the comments. So definitely let us know in the comments, guys. And yeah, you can check me out at talkingrock.net. And the Talking Metal podcast, of course, is going strong on iTunes and Spreaker and iHeart. So definitely
Yeah.
subscribe to that.
And
And we
and go
will.
check out
Yeah.
your interview with Eric Singer. I mean, we're talking
Oh, yeah.
Kiss all
Thanks.
day long, so hey, you just
Talking Metal
interviewed.
episode 718, Eric Singer. Great interview. Chatty
Yeah.
guy. At least he, he was on December 30th, 2017 when we did the interview with him.
Yeah, some great tidbits in there. You got since we're talking Kiss, let's talk rock and talk Eric Singer. So go check that out.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mitch.
folks.